So this is October 7, and we have to face the trauma and the genocide going on. And it's going on, and it's almost like we're standing by, but we don't want to, because we have a lot of grief, and we have a lot of frustration, and a lot of sadness, and a lot of loss, and outrage. And we, as Jewish Americans and Americans in general and Palestinians, we need to find ways to work together and to help address it. And you know, there are groups in Israel doing exactly what I want to do, what I would like to see done. And if I was in my 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or maybe even 60s, I hope that I would be over there doing work with this group called Standing Together. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the thing in the United States has been, unlike Standing Together, which is a real joint Jewish-Arab movement, everything is jointly led, and they're working to have real parity between Jews and Palestinian Israelis. These are Israeli citizens of Palestinian background. Everything's in Hebrew and Arabic. And everything right now essentially is focused on helping people in Gaza and the West Bank and preventing Israeli atrocities, preventing the blockade of food, trying to prevent the targeting of aid workers, and also, you know, protecting, I think they're trying to protect civil liberties, which is going in a bad way, really bad way. So Standing Together is one of the few really on the ground activist groups doing what I think is necessary to build a foundation. And it's a foundation more than dialogue, it's action. Johannes, what do you think? Johannes, what do you think, man?
I have a couple of questions, Johnny.
Okay.
First, how do we face the hard truth that what's happening is a genocide? And what can we ordinary people actually do about it? How can we confront the painful truth of what's happening? That so many innocent lives are being lost, and what real action can we take?
Yeah, and that is the hardest painful truth, because, for sure, because Jews, actually, it was a Jewish lawyer after the Holocaust who created the term and defined the term genocide. And so we were the victims of the first officially delineated genocide. So the idea that Israel is creating genocide is just so hard to accept that even friends of mine who are very much on the left, very critical of what's going on, some of them still can't accept that it is a genocide. People try to find some little, little reason why it might not be, but that's not true. It really is. I mean, the combination of starvation, of wiping out hospitals, schools, aid workers, journalists, and of course, thousands of villages and thousands of children, doctors, the whole thing, and putting blockades on food aid and so forth. You know, a combination of murdering, let's say, devastation, starvation, and making it seem like there would be no chance to rebuild Gaza. Now, the people that I've been standing vigil with on Sundays, not every Sunday, but sometimes, and they've been doing it ever since, every single Sunday since October 7, 2023. A small group, pretty much silent, in front of Massachusetts State House, and they don't use flags and so forth. And they had a hard time, I believe, calling it genocide, but they do now, definitely, forthrightly. And they haven't called for specific actions, but they're calling for an end to that, of course. They're calling for an end to U.S. military support for Israel. And that was also a hard thing to accept, because Israel and the U.S. have been these great allies and so forth, and we as Jewish Americans have been pretty proud about that. And the idea of really reducing that, you know, for many people sounds like a defeat. But it's actually something that will happen. It's fait accompli. Because what really has happened is that as soon as October 7th happened, and I did another podcast on this called I Called My Brother. That was the title. I called my brother in Sweden, in English. He's an American. And we had very similar politics. And we both said that Netanyahu was going to blow it, was going to fuck it all up. Because the world was showing real sympathy for Israel in the situation of a semi-Holocaust, or the beginning of a Holocaust, called by Hamas. Nobody has defended Hamas except crazy people. Nobody with any legitimacy has defended what Hamas did. What I felt on that first day was, one, Netanyahu is going to fuck it all up and turn the world against us or against Israel. And it did, my God. Every day, a labor union in Italy, you know, just nations all over the world, nations that were allies of Israel. So he's like self-destructive, or he's a masochist, or he's a madman. The other thing was that it was going to cause totally an eruption, a tsunami of anti-Semitism across the world. And my God, of course, it has. Who could predict that? Any reasonable person looking at it. But the one other thing that I thought about the first day was, this is the worst security breach ever in the history of Israel. Israel has the most admired military force, defense force, security force, intelligence force in the world, pretty much. Nobody would expect that Israel would be looking the other way when this large group of Hamas people on motor scooters comes across the border and kills between 1,200 and 1,500 Israelis and kidnaps, what was it, 200 and something, to hold them hostage. I couldn't believe it, because Israel's never had that happen. And then they've been fighting a war that has gone on longer than anything else. I wonder how it's not affecting the economy or the morale. And I know that the country is very divided about it. The thing they're most divided about is the hostages, because Israel has always placed the highest focus, the highest focus on rescuing hostages. I mean, really, really, really large. One of the guys, I don't know if this is the last guy, there was an American Israeli. He was both American and Israeli citizen, a guy who was kidnapped and held in Gaza, and it was one guy, and it was a worldwide scandal, and they got him out, I don't know how quickly. The other thing that's really, I think, paradoxical is that, you know, so it looks to many Israelis that Netanyahu hasn't put a priority, that was the word I was looking for, a priority on rescuing the hostages, because he's refused to do ceasefires, or he's done them and then reneged on them, or they've lasted for a few weeks. However, his brother Jonathan Netanyahu was the hero in 1976 of the Israeli amazing raid, turned into about 3 films and about 3 theater productions, called The Rescue at Entebbe in Uganda, at the airport, where quite a number of Jews and Israelis were kidnapped not by Palestinians, by, I think it was this extremist Red Brigades from Germany. And they had them held at the airport. And the Uganda was under Idi Amin at the time, and it was sort of playing footsie with it. So Israel was able to get in there, let's see, after Germany, led by Jonathan Netanyahu, who was killed in the operation, brother of Benjamin. Compared to what Jonathan did, I mean, it's a no-brainer. So I would say that Jonathan lives as a hero to this day, and Benjamin is going to be completely, when he leaves office, he'll be indicted, he'll be convicted, his name and his regime will be completely trashed, as it should be. So we got a situation where we've got, on the one hand, Hamas, nobody can support that, and we've got Netanyahu, who is bringing Israel down the drain with his ultra-right-wing cabinet and with raising the violent intent of various people in Israel, of Israelis, like the settlers on the West Bank. And nobody's being punished. Soldiers are not being punished. I mean, the morale in the army must be really bad because they've had a pretty disciplined armed forces. And it seems like there's no discipline, that it's like, shoot what you can. Now, I'm not an expert on it. I'm not there. And I know that a lot of Israelis don't know what's going on fully because the media has been, in Israel, the media was so wide open. But now there's a lot of restrictions from the government on foreign media and I think on domestic media. So Israelis in general are not getting the full picture. They don't know how much destruction. They wouldn't be able to see, most of them, that it's a genocide. And they, because of the nature of the country and the nature of our history as Jews, it's hard to be self-critical. It's really hard to be self-critical because we've been the victims. So to accept the idea that we're the victimizers is a real hard pill to swallow.
Johnny, do you believe people can care deeply about both sides and still be part of the solution?
Yes, and I'm sitting on two flags, Palestinian flag and the Israeli flag. I don't think either of those should be demonized. I know the Israeli flag has been demonized lately. The Palestinian flag has been celebrated. They both represent a people, a nation. I believe that if we say the land of Israel is the full land of the Palestinians and of the Israelis, that what we have is two peoples, two religions, two languages, two histories, and two nations. And trying to divide it, I think, is a huge mistake. Now, that puts me pretty far outside on a limb, and I'm not expecting that to happen. But I think, from my point of view, that's the trajectory that needs to happen.
How can we honor the pain and history of both peoples and still find the courage to imagine a shared future of peace?
How can we know the, I'm sorry?
How can we honor the pain of and history of both nations?
Yes, we have to. You're right. Yes, we have to. And the thing, let's go back a little bit. You know, a lot of Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims and people on that side think that Jews showed up in Israel because of the Holocaust, and they just showed up, and it was a colonial project, and they don't really belong there. And if there was utopia, they would go back to Poland. All right. Do you know how many thinking errors are in that one sentence? There's about 15 thinking errors, which shows a total lack of knowledge, of cognition, of perspective, of empathy. I've got this sign on empathy now. So, a button. We have to have empathy for both sides. Jews showed up in Israel because for all the years that Jews were in exile, Israel, what was Jerusalem and Zion, is what was talked about being the utopian or the goal, the trajectory of Jewish history. It wasn't an accident. I mean, they weren't bowing to Warsaw or New York City or Zabar's great Jewish deli in Upper West Side. No, there wasn't a religious devotion to any place over those years except Jerusalem. And the other thing is that why was Israel exiled? Well, two major empires, the Babylonian Empire and the good old Roman Empire, that Christians and Catholics especially think was a great thing, with the church moving to Rome from being a Jewish sect in Israel or Palestine. So Israel wasn't really an independent nation state, neither was Palestine. All of these areas were part of empires. They weren't separate nation states. And all of them suffered. So Israel had the Babylonians, the Ottomans, some other group, the Hellenists, and the Greeks, and the British. And those groups controlled all the Middle East, or, wide range. So the idea that this Palestinian flag represents a long-standing history is not true. The Israeli flag doesn't really represent, as a flag, a history, but the symbols do. And therefore, the idea of weaponizing the word colonialism, imperialism, Zionism, and thinking that it's some evil force is, again, a thinking error. However, I happen to be a person who believes that patriotism is necessary and good. And nationalism always becomes extreme. In the case of Palestinian nationalism, there have been a lot of signs of that, but it's in its infancy. And so we'd have to let it play out, have to let it kind of do its thing somehow, as long as it's not at the expense of a Jewish presence in Israel. But Zionism has already done and achieved what it needed to. So I would call myself a post-Zionist. I'm not anti because I believe that it achieved and necessary stuff, like in gathering the exiles, like reviving the Hebrew language, like creating a Jewish working class, like creating a state and an army, things that we never had since many, many years, thousands, okay? And as a result, it had suffered every form of persecution. And the Palestinians need to have those kind of infrastructures in place. And they're only at a very early stage. And we, as Israelis, or I'm not an Israeli, but Israel has been thwarting that, has seen it as a threat, or has defined it as a threat. Total big mistake. And it's a mistake that has to be corrected, but how? Johann asks how. One of the ways, just one example, besides standing together, is an incredible group called the Parents' Circle. If you want to talk about courage, this would be the essence of courage. This group is made up of fathers, I think it's just fathers, on both sides. Israeli Jewish fathers and Palestinian fathers who live in the occupied territories, i.e. the West Bank. Each of them have lost a child, because of the conflict, has been killed by the other side. Each of them, on both sides. Well, what would be the natural response is hatred, revenge, resentment, and inability to connect, right? It started with two men, two fathers. The Israeli father lost his daughter at age 10, I believe. It was killed when the Intifada was happening. They were blowing up buses in Tel Aviv, and she was on one of the buses. And the Palestinian son was 15, I think, and he was killed completely out of whack against the rules, let's say, by the Israel Defense Forces who were patrolling or operating, which they do, in the West Bank. He was completely innocent. The two fathers ended up becoming colleagues, comrades, friends. And from there, it's become a pretty large movement. There's hundreds of members, all of them, people, Jews and Arabs, Jews and Palestinians, Israelis, Palestinians, who have lost a person, a son, a daughter, It could also be a brother, I believe, or sister to the conflict. That's the kind of thing that we need. Everything's done in Hebrew and Arabic and English, and I'm on the Friends of Parents Circle. I'm a contributor, as well as to Standing Together, because I believe that anything that's going to work for peace and reconciliation has to be a joint effort, has to be equality. So peace, justice, and equality, the three things have to go together.
We know pain runs deep and hearts are divided. May peace and understanding reach them all. So thank you, Johnny, for choosing empathy, for believing in peace, and for standing with both sides. That's the kind of voice the world needs right now.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you so much.